Hi everyone, Ranger Aaron here and welcome to Solstice Canyon. This park is one of my favorite locations in the Santa Monica Mountains, and that is why today I'm going to be telling all of you out there about the history of this amazing location. And the history of Solstice Canyon begins all the way back in the Spanish Mission era when there was a massive land grant called Rancho Topanga Malibu Saquite. This massive land grant was well over 13,000 acres, covering all the coast and inland from the LA Ventura County border all the way eastward towards Topanga Canyon. And that included Solstice Canyon. Now, an interesting fact is we don't know how it got the name Solstice. This place, it was originally called Sosto or Sostomo Canyon, and we believe the name actually started out from a mispronunciation from the Chumash Native American village here called Lojosochni, and that was down towards the coast. I would imagine if anyone other than Chumash tried to pronounce that over and over, it would have eventually just kind of become Sosto or Sostomo Canyon. Now, this massive land grant, including Solstice Canyon, was eventually then sold over to a guy by the name of Leon Victor Prudhomme, which married into the Tapia family. However, he purchased this property around 1848. And that is a special time because that was around the same time, just a little bit later, when the Treaty of Guadalupe was signed and California became part of the United States. And there was actually a rule in place that allowed all these rancho grants to stay in place under the United States management. However, Prudhomme didn't have the proper documentation. So then this property was sold to Matthew Keller, an immigrant from Ireland who is fluent in French but also mastered the art of fine winemaking and introduced this fine wine industry here to the Santa Monica area and especially Los Angeles County. He even introduced selling wine even to the East Coast. Keller had two wineries, and this is how he had this business running. Those two wineries were called the Los Angeles Winery and the Rising Sun Winery. And if you've been out here to Solstice Canyon to hike the trails, you might notice the name Rising Sun rings a bell. And that is because one of our trails out here is called the Rising Sun Trail, named after one of the wineries that Matthew Keller was running. So later in the years, this property was then passed on to his son, Henry Keller, and that was around the 1880s. And by the 1890s, Henry Keller didn't want to keep managing this whole vast property. So what he did is he then sold it to the Ringe family. But he still loved Solstice Canyon. And so what he actually did is he purchased the property, a cabin, here in Solstice Canyon to continue his love of hunting and fishing in this fine area. So this stop over here may not look like much, and to many it really isn't. It's just a field of overgrown vegetation. But this field actually has an important history here in Solstice Canyon. This site used to be that of a corral that was managed by one of the last owners we're going to cover later on by the name of Fred Roberts. He owned Solstice Canyon from the 1940s all the way through the 1970s. And he would bring a lot of the animals he had out here on this property into this corral. Some of the cool animals he would bring would include reindeer, giraffes, camels. And the reason he did this is because he liked to invite children from the local Malibu area to come and check out these creatures. And that is just kind of an amazing thing. How often do you see reindeer here in California? For me, I never see them. Maybe in the home videos that we have that we're showing you today. So this next stop over here, what you probably see is a gigantic burned down oak tree. Well, this site is actually pretty important because it talks a lot about the early history of Solstice Canyon, because this spot, this tree, was the boundary marker at the northernmost point of Rancho Topanga Malibu Saquite. And we have a story of an early couple called the Swinney family, Henry and Cordelia Swinney, who purchased a house up here from a guy that all we have by name is Mr. Murphy. And they lived up here up until about 1890s. And that, as you may remember, is a time when Henry Keller sold the property to the Ringe family. Well, after this sale, there was a survey done to establish the boundaries of Rancho Topanga Malibu Sikit. And when they did this northern boundary, they found that Henry and Cordelia Swinney, though purchasing a house up here, were actually encroaching on their property. And what they had to do when that was discovered is pack up and move their house. And that's unfortunately for them what they had to do. They took down their wooden house, their wooden shack, and moved it over just a couple hundred feet out that direction down the road. So if on your hike here in Solstice Canyon you come across this weird looking design, this actually used to be a suspension bridge that would get you from this side of the creek all the way over there to the location of the cabin where Henry and Cordelia had to move to. After Henry and Cordelia Swinney moved their house all the way over here across the creek, later in 1901, it was when Matthew Keller decided to finally buy property out here in Solstice Canyon. The property he bought was the cabin owned by Henry and Cordelia Swinney. And so after he made his purchase in 1901, just a short time later, in 1903, the whole cabin burned down. And what he decided to do, knowing that this canyon was prone to wildfires, is he decided to rebuild this cabin out of stone and tin, so he never had to go through that process ever again. Right here at this wayside exhibit, we have a picture of Henry Keller waving from his stone and tin cabin. Welcome to the cabin. This is the location where Henry and Cordelia had to move their older wooden cabin. Then the site that Henry Keller purchased the cabin from the Swinney family, and then later rebuilt this stone and tin cabin. Of course, as you can see right behind me, it's no longer a stone and tin cabin. It is now a ruin, missing a lot of features, including that tin roof. It's because this cabin has gone through several other fires since it was built. But this is also the site where we can get into the history of Fred Roberts and his wife Florence Roberts, who became the last owners of Solstice Canyon. The story goes that in around 1940, him and his wife were driving along Pacific Coast Highway, and they came across this lovely canyon, Solstice Canyon. And so they parked their car and had a short walk in this area, and they decided this is a very lovely place, and they wanted to see about the possibility of living here. And so they met with Henry Keller and came upon an agreement to rent this hunting cabin to be their weekend getaway. And it didn't take them long after doing that to realize they really want to live here. They have an amazing creek flowing almost year-round with trout swimming around it, wildlife all around you. Of course, you're a very short drive from the ocean. And so they made this purchase, and you might wonder, how could they afford to buy property? Even early in Malibu, it wouldn't be a cheap purchase. They could afford it because Fred Roberts was actually a really well-off businessman. He operated over 90 market stores called Roberts Markets and Roberts Market and Liquor. Over 90 stores all throughout LA, including in Culver City. And if I were to turn this around, this actual brochure, you can even see how cheap everything was. I mean, look at that price for steaks, 24 cents. That's good. Well, that's how he could afford it. He had this massive market chain. And if you're ever wondering what this place used to look like before it got all burnt down, well, there's a picture. This, of course, wasn't quite what it would have looked like when it was owned by them. This is how it looked in probably the early 2000s. But it was a very beautiful spot. And after they made the purchase of this property, they even made a whole lot of alterations to Solstice Canyon. They built a system of check dams and pools to control the flow of water so they could prevent further erosion. So let's go check out one of those pools right now, and I'll show you a little bit more about it. And over here, we have one of those pools that Fred Roberts built. But this isn't just your ordinary pool of water. Yeah, it had some fish, the ducks might have sailed around in it. But you know what also sailed around? Him and his kids. This was actually a rowing pond. They would hop in the car, drive over here, and have a rowboat waiting for them to just sail around and have a good afternoon. Come over here. I want to show you one thing. It's fairly hard to see, but if you look at it in the right light, this actually reads May 1953. We don't know what this date was specifically, but I like to think this was when they built this whole growing pond, but don't know for sure. So everything you see up here are the remains of Fred and Florence's house that they commissioned to be built in 1952. This house was actually built by a renowned architect by the name of Paul Revere Williams, an African-American architect in the mid-1900s. This guy was so popular, he was building houses for the stars. People like Lucille Ball, Frank Sinatra, he built their homes. And what's amazing about his story is that he was building houses for neighborhoods he would not be allowed to live in. But because he was so famous, Fred Roberts thought he was the perfect man for the job, and he really was. Here you can see what the house actually used to look like. Right to my left, that grassy area actually was a really beautiful swimming pool. So let's go about this house and I'll show you a few cool features about what's going on over here. So there's so much cool stuff out here, so I'm going to start with what I have right here behind me. So what you see is actually a concrete bridge. And on either side, you'll see what remains of a fish pond. What Fred Roberts would do, reportedly, is bring in fish from the lower part of the stream to these ponds right here. And he'd want to preserve them, so he'd actually forbid anyone from watering their horses in these ponds. Now, one thing you might notice, there's still water in them. And that's because there's actually a natural hot spring right underneath this house. So you're always going to see water, and any number of their water features are even spilling out onto the roadway. And to build on this, I have some cool pictures of the area right behind me showing even those ponds. In this picture, you'll see a two-story pool house right behind the pool. And on the other side, a picture showing the property from that second-story pool house. Definitely an amazing looking property. And one more cool photo, always have to show more. Shows the family relaxing poolside. So let's walk across this and take a closer look at what they have on this property. So even though this house is burned down, one cool fact is that when they built their properties out here in Solstice Canyon, they knew fires were a big problem. So from his design, he actually installed a sprinkler system all throughout the property to help prevent wildfires from burning down this house. So we've covered the outside of the house from the pond to the pool. So now let's go inside the house. We're gonna go room by room in a tour showing before and after from what the house used to look like to what it looks like today. So we're not inside yet, but we have to stop by this room right here because it just looks really cool. This is actually the kitchen outbuilding where they would come poolside to prepare meals, hamburgers, what have you, without having to get the indoor wet when they're swimming in the pool. All right, so let's go in the back door right here. We are now officially in the house. What we have to our right, we don't have pictures of this room right over here, but this was the maid's quarters. This is where the person who was taking care of the house would live. You can still see remains of the small little bathroomette where they had the tub and the toilet. This is the room right here. Might have been a little small, but even I would have loved to live in a house, a room this small just to live on this property. Now, opposite of the maid's quarters was the kitchen. You can still see the stove right here. And right to my left, they would have had a little sink. Not a lot of counter space, as you can see, but definitely enough to do everything they needed. Now, something a little more recognizable will be the other side. You can see what that stove used to look like. Just to the left, you would have had the refrigerator. And of course, right behind me, the doorway straight into the dining room. Beautiful area. They had a big old table. Right here you can see the fireplace just right back here where you can hear my voice echoing. That's because This room is still relatively intact, but this is the pantry where they would have stored a lot of their dry foods. So let's get a look at what this dining room actually used to look like. Here's a picture of it from one angle, looking down into the living room. On the reverse side, here's what it would have looked like coming right out of the kitchen. And over here in this big area, I'll give you one guess. Yeah, this is the living room. This big open area. They have this big, another fireplace, of course. We can see the living room, though, had these huge, gigantic windows to let in so much light. Definitely would have been a lovely spot just to sit and relax, have some family time. And if it's cold out, you turn on that fireplace. You can see it roaring right here in this picture. And this room actually has one of my favorite features of all. That is because it is a little bar nook. Right over here in this corner, it's dried up right now, but what you used to have is a little waterfall, little water feature just on the other side of the bar. Whether or not you're making coffee in the morning or making a special drink and dinner in the evening, just sitting here at that bar with the radio playing or just listening to the water coming down definitely would have been a soothing spot. And so from this living room, this is where you get to the front door, which is right here in this picture, or right here. This is where the front door is, but it's also the hallway where you'd make your way over to the TV room. Let's go see what's playing. So as we come down this hallway, as if we're turning right after we entered the front door, we're gonna find ourselves in the TV room. This is the den where the kids or the family would all gather around and watch TV. They would even have the TV, as you can see, built right into the wall. Very fancy. I'm not sure what shows they might have been watching. Maybe I Love Lucy. But whatever it was actually a really comfortable room. And right outside the sliding glass doors in this same room, even a beautiful spot just right outside. I'm not sure if you can hear it in this video, but I hear right now the water flowing loudly down in the creek. Out behind me, we have a couple other rooms. We don't necessarily know what this first room is, but the one in the distance, right straight ahead, would have been the parents' apartment. That's a location where if the grandparents, the parents of Fred and Florence Roberts, if they came out to visit them, this is where they would have stayed. You can see the remains of the old bathroom right here in the corner and a couple windows, even one facing out towards that water feature we saw from behind the bar in the living room area. And the last room down this hallway is, of course, the master bedroom. Quite noticeable when you notice this is the only room down in this area that has its very own fireplace. This is where Fred and Florence Roberts would have stayed when living out here on this property. And what's really cool about this room, not only is it bigger than the others, except for the living room, they had their own patio right over here. So if they wanted to come into their bedroom without going in the front door, maybe they had a lot of people visiting, they could just go straight into their bedroom. Or if they wanted a place to relax in the evening, just walk out over here and just kind of enjoy the beauty of this house and this canyon. So the house is really cool, isn't it? I would have definitely loved to live here. And there's one more cool thing, kind of a little secret about this property that's really cool, and it's up by the waterfall. So before we're done, let's go check it out. Beautiful, isn't it? There's the waterfall, and the secret that we have about this waterfall is if you look straight ahead, over there, you'll see there's kind of a stone wall. What the Roberts family actually did up there is they built a barbecue set. And so, not only could you choose whether to barbecue right by the pool, you could also choose to walk up here and have your own grill with chairs and relax right next to this beautiful pool of water. So what do you think of everything you've seen today? a barbecue set right next to a waterfall, a house beautifully built, so it is actually sitting along with nature, not just a large house sitting on top of nature. The ambiance of this place, I think it's a really beautiful area that I would have loved to have been able to visit, particularly in its heyday. But all stories have their ends, and the end for this story, at least for the Roberts family in their place in Solstice, ends towards the late 1970s when Fred Roberts passed away. And then this property was then transferred over to be a part of the public lands in Southern California, something perhaps Fred Roberts would have loved to have seen, because this site was kind of a focal point in early day Malibu. He'd invite kids over here to see the animals, host events and gatherings such as those for the police, and then to see a place that he owned turn into a public park. I'm sure perhaps he would have been happy to see that done. Unfortunately, a couple years after it became part of the public land system in 1982, a fire came through and burned this place down. But you know, despite that happening, even today, even though this place is kind of a ruin, it's still beautiful, with nature slowly overtaking it, but still giving kind of a hint at what this place was back in the late 1900s. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.